Was that Robert I just heard? I can't believe he'd say that word. Martin looked up from his tests and papers, somewhat horrified. Through the classroom doors out to the bridge, he peered around, squinting just a smidge. It was his son, and he was just in time to see him kicking Calvin right in his backside. That's no way to play. Stop it, I say. Martin's voice was choked up with dismay. In all his time, he'd never seen anyone from his family curse. I'll do nothing of the sort, his 12-year-old answered with a snort. And to Calvin, he then added, next time it'll be worse. You get right back in here now. My son, I can't have you in a row. Calvin and the others took off, and down the path they tore. But Robert ducked inside the church, leaving Martin right there in the lurch, with nothing but an empty sense that he'd scarce felt before. Martin leaned on the rail, looked around, but there was no comfort to be found. So he turned, went inside, and back at his desk he sat. So much grading left to do, but all he did was sit and stew. What did I do to cause my son to lash out at me like that? Perhaps it isn't about you. Stuff like that happened to me too. Martin turned, and coming through the doorway was the other teacher, Pat. Back in the day when you taught me, but behind your back so you didn't see, Pat took a chair, plopped it down, and in front of Martin sat. And yes, Martin, I'm quite new to this teaching thing, and thanks to you, I get to live my dream when we are a province at long last. But in my life before, I've seen so many to others like me being mean. It's so very hard for some of us to thrive, let alone to hold fast. Sorry, Pat, I don't understand. And what's that bit about Canada and Newfoundland? Martin eyed the two flags pinned above the old bookshelf. Pat answered, new start for me and you, but for Robert, a new beginning too. But perhaps that's a thing that you'd best bring up with your son yourself. Martin shrugged. I suppose you're right. I'll talk with him later on tonight. Then he put his papers in his case and back to the house he walked. He's home already, Martin supposed, but Robert's bedroom door was closed. So he cooked supper, drew a breath, and then on the door he knocked. I'm not hungry. Go away. But Martin stayed in the doorway. Can we at least talk about what happened today at school? Through the closed door, his son did shout, I've nothing with you to talk about. Martin retorted, now don't you dare to treat me for a fool. It was useless. He would not get through, and knowing not what else to do, Martin ate supper, fetched the papers, and started grading them. And by the kerosene lamp's steady light, he worked late into the night, fell asleep at the table, and awoke right there next day at 9 a.m. At school, Pat could no longer wait, but it was unlike Martin to be late, so they rang the bell, and on both classrooms kept an eye. Robert, is your father ill today? He walked out to her. I can't rightly say. We haven't spoken the past few days, he admitted with a sigh. There he is. Pat followed Robert's gaze, and there, emerging from the morning haze, was Martin, huffing, puffing, and running full tilt up the hill. Hat askew, coat open too, his puffed out cheeks now slightly blue. He reached the bridge, and Pat stopped him. Martin, just sit and take a spell. I slept late. I'm sorry, Pat. Well, you're here now, so don't worry about that. Take a few minutes, and I'll watch both classes while you rest. Pat went back in, took Robert aside. The tension between you I cannot abide. Can you please just tell me straight what has the both of you so stressed? Robert moved back from the door, then cast his eyes down on the floor. Look, I know it's only names, and I should be used to it by now. But there's only so much that I can bear being called pansy, fairy, fruit, and queer. I've had enough, and I've got to make it stop somehow. Robert, is that the problem? Are you sure? I've seen you deal with worse before. And as you said yourself, those are only names. Robert answered, what makes me mad is they say they'll tell my mom and dad, and I just know them doing that will only cause my family shame. Pat said, we are who we are, and that has been enough so far. Your family needs to know the truth, and perhaps the time is now. Robert answered, I don't know. It would be hard to do, although I suppose I should be the one, as they'll find out anyhow. Next day, Martin seemed more at ease, and Pat could not pass up the chance to tease. Your alarm clock's working again, Martin responded with a grin. Yes, and thanks to you, I now know what Robert's been through and how difficult for him these past few months have been. And what's more, I was wrong to make it about me, and I'm so grateful that you helped me see. To be honest, I had no idea what was going on. Pat laughed. Another set of eyes is good to help you see things that you should. After all, this is by no means the first time you've been wrong. Remember when you, Anna, and I were in the punt, and out of nowhere you did cry, Pat, you're a girl. Martin answered, yes, the day I started to find my way. Pat said, well, you were sort of wrong about that. Martin replied, I don't get it, Pat. Don't worry about it, answered Pat. That one's for another day.